here's the shift left concept. If I take this diagram and I flip it 90 degrees to the right, you can see how if I shift left, I move a $62 ticket to $22, or I move an $85 ticket to $62. This basically shows, and this is North American data, by the way, for 2014, the fully loaded cost of a service desk ticket resolved in 2014 was $22. If the ticket got pushed to desktop support, add to that another $62. So this is not a total cost of $62. If the ticket starts at level 1 and then goes to desktop support, it's $22 plus $62. If it goes to level 3 in IT, you're talking about $85 fully loaded cost, nearly $200 for field support, and $471, nearly $500 for vendor support. So this is the importance of first-level resolution rate. If you can push tickets down to level 1, or user self-help, assuming that it's a simple ticket like a password reset, it makes sense because you can reduce the cost fairly dramatically. Let's take a look at the trend from 2010 to 2015. Once again, overwhelmingly positive. Costs are down, largely due to channel mix. That is the introduction of lower-cost channels such as web submission. Email can sometimes be lower cost, sometimes it's not lower cost, but chat is really the one that's driven down this cost. The adoption of chat has reduced the cost per inbound contact on the service desk. First-level resolution has improved as organizations understand the importance of level 1 resolution rate. Utilization has gone up a little bit. Customer satisfaction has actually gone down. This is a reflection of the fact that customers expect and demand more from service and support than they have historically. Net first contact resolution rate is up because companies, by and large, understand now the connection between FCR, first contact resolution rate, and customer satisfaction. FCR, biggest driver of customer satisfaction. And then finally, agent job satisfaction has basically remained flat over the last 5 years. So there's a pretty positive story that's being told here about the trend in performance for both desktop support and service desk. In both cases, what we see is that performance has improved over the last 5 years, and this is a reflection of the fact that IT organizations worldwide recognize and are beginning to exploit the strategic potential of service and support. Now, above and beyond the quantitative data that I've shared with you so far, I'd like to share with you some empirical observations that I've made, or that we have made, based upon the benchmarks that came out of these 19 countries in the first 3 quarters of 2015. One is that the channel mix is changing. No surprise there. Most of you know that chat is gaining on voice, as an example. User self-help is increasing. Web-submitted tickets are increasing as a percent of the total channel mix. Shift-left strategies, I talked about that a few moments ago, are becoming more common. Compensation is actually going up, and that's a good sign, and it's a good thing, and I'll explain why momentarily. Most support organizations have a scorecard. Turnover reduction strategies are being employed because companies recognize, as I mentioned earlier, if you're spending $12,000 every time a person walks out the door in the service desk, that's costly. If you're spending $15,000 every time one of your desktop technicians leaves, because you got to find a person, recruit them, you got to screen them, you got to train them, you want to try and reduce that turnover as much as possible. Hybrid desks that do both level 1 and desktop support are becoming more common. Technician accountability is increasing, meaning technicians are increasingly being held accountable to a productivity goal, a quality goal as measured by customer satisfaction, and typically a ticket handling goal like first contact resolution rate. And more we see service and support being managed as a business, and I'll explain that when I get to that section. Let's talk first about channel mix. Let me explain the axes we've got here. The left axis, is the percentage of tickets being submitted through this channel at level 1. So voice, blue line here, web, orange line down here, chat, gray line here. You interpret these on the left axis. This is a percentage. You can see that voice tickets have gone from 80% in 2008 to a little over 60% in 2015. What about web tickets? Well, they were around 12 or 13% back in 2008. They're now around 10% in 2015. Chat has gone from about 8% to nearly 30%. Chat has been the big growth channel. Voice has been the channel that has lost the most volume. Probably not a bad thing because chat on average is lower cost. Now again, these 3 lines, blue, orange, and gray, you interpret on the left axis. The one you interpret on the right axis is this yellow line here, which is the cost per contact. Average cost per contact has gone from about $25 down to around $17.50 between 2008 and 2015. So you can see how the cost has gone down as the channel mix has changed. In terms of shift-left strategies, I've taken that diagram I showed you earlier, and I did turn it 90 degrees to the right, and I've tried to show how incident prevention, these are the best incidents, the ones you never have. How do you get there? Well, through root cause analysis, through effective end-user training, and through good systems design. If you can prevent an incident, good. It doesn't cost you anything. Nobody loses any productivity. Self-help, on average, is about $2 a ticket. Service desk, fully loaded cost, about $22. Ticket resolved at desktop support, fully loaded, $62. On top of $22 if the ticket starts out in desktop support, $85 for level 3 IT support, nearly $200 for field support, and $500 for vendor support. You're going to see these same metrics back here, 471, 196, 85, 62, 22, exact same numbers that you see on this chart. I've just rotated it 90 degrees to the right to emphasize the idea that shift left has real economic value. There's a saying in this industry, get it done at level 1. It's not just a catchphrase. There's real value in getting it done at level 1. You can reduce total cost of ownership and return dollars to your organization. I mentioned that compensation is increasing, and here's the reason why. There's a wage rate paradox in service and support, and if you go out and you hire the least costly people you can, that is, you spend as little money as you possibly can on service and support, well, you can spend $30,000 a year, say here in the Washington, D.C. area, which is where RightStar and MetricNet are both located, and you can find people that will answer your phones and people that will try and do some troubleshooting, but they're not going to be very effective. They're not going to be well-trained. They're not going to be very experienced. They might not be all that well-educated. And so a lot of the tickets are going to get pushed out to what we call N-level. Okay, so you take an inexperienced person, and your costs are actually higher than if you were willing to pay a little bit more for a person. Why does our total cost of ownership go down when we pay more? Because when you pay more, you get a more qualified, more experienced, better educated rep, technician, or level 1 analyst, and that helps reduce your total cost of ownership because they get things done on first contact and they reduce tickets that get escalated that shouldn't be escalated. In other words, the first level resolution rate is better when you're willing to pay a little bit more. Now, the reason the curve turns back up is, if you go out and hire a bunch of PhDs at $200,000 a year, well, your costs are not going to keep going down. So at some point, this curve does start to turn up. It's asymmetrical. I want to call it a U-shaped curve, but that suggests it's symmetrical, and it's really not. It's actually not as steep on the right-hand side of this apex, this lower apex, as it is on the left-hand side. But the point is this. If you're trying to get by on the cheap and you're not offering salaries that are competitive, you will be rewarded justly, meaning that your total cost of ownership will be higher than it should be. And this is actually something you think you're saving money, not by any stretch of the imagination. You're actually introducing hidden costs into the organization because level 1 will not be competent enough to resolve tickets that they can and should resolve at level 1, and you're just going to push them out here to these more expensive resolution levels. And so think about what this number is in the Washington, D.C. area. The starting salary for level 1 technicians that optimizes this total cost of ownership is about $45,000 a year, but it varies quite a bit. If you're in San Francisco, you can't even get a level 1 tech to show up for a job interview unless you're offering $65,000. And if it's a desktop support job, they're not going to show up unless you're offering $70,000 to start. By contrast, if you go down to Pensacola, Florida, or Paducah, Kentucky, you can actually get pretty good talent for about $35,000 a year at level 1, and for desktop support for around $40,000 a year, you can get pretty good talent. So these numbers will vary depending upon where you are in the country, but the key thing I want you to take away is that there is a paradox here. And the idea that we're going to find analysts on the cheap or technicians on the cheap, it's going to cost you in the long run. Most support organizations have a scorecard now. The way the scorecard works is you select the metrics that you consider to be the most important. In this example here, these are desktop support metrics. We put a weighting on each one of the metric, and keep in mind here we've got all the major metric categories represented. We have our cost metrics. We have our quality metric, customer satisfaction. We have our ticket handling metric, first visit resolution rate. We've got our productivity metric of utilization. We've got 2 service level metrics, and we've got job satisfaction. These get weighted according to their relative importance, and then for your representative peer group, you can't just pull a number out of the air. What you need to know is for your benchmarking peer group, what are the worst performers and what are the best performers? Those are the values that go in the 3rd and 4th columns from the left. You would then put your own performance in the 3rd column from the right, and you calculate a metric score that ranges from 0 to 100% using this interpolation formula. Worst case minus your actual performance. That's the numerator of the ratio. The denominator of the ratio is worst case minus best case, worst minus best. You'll end up with a metric score between 0 and 100%. You're at 0 if you have the worst score in the benchmark. You'll be at 100 if you have the best score in the benchmark. The final step is to multiply the metric score by the metric weighting to come up with the balanced score for each, in this case, each of the 8 metrics in the scorecard. This, again, is for desktop support. You can create something comparable for the service desk. Usually a service desk scorecard is going to have just 6 metrics in it. But when we add this up, we come up with a single number between 0 and 100% that tells us how we're performing. We can use it to benchmark against other organizations. You see, no other metric does this. If you tell me, well, my cost was down last month, I want to know, well, what happened to your service levels and what happened to your customer satisfaction? Because if they're down also, I'm not impressed. By contrast, if you say, hey, cost was down last month, customer satisfaction was up, and mean time to resolve was also down, that I'm impressed by. What the balanced score does is it normalizes all that. And so instead of looking at individual metrics, you're looking at a broader picture. You're looking at aggregate performance. You're aggregating cost and quality, ticket handling, productivity, service level, and technician metrics. You're normalizing them, rolling them together to create a single overall measure of performance that you can then use to compare to other support organizations, and you can also use it to track and trend your performance. So if you update your scorecard monthly, these blue bars represent real data from a client of ours. Update the scorecard monthly, and you're moving in the right direction, which this organization is. Scorecard started out at 60% at the beginning of the year. It was almost 80% by the end of the year. Purple background here represents the trailing 12-month average. So the scorecard does a lot for you, gives you a single measure of your performance that you can compare to other organizations and also use it to trend your overall performance. Turnover reduction strategies. Most companies now recognize how expensive turnover is, but they also know that job satisfaction is a function of compensation, coaching, career pathing, and training. And if you invest appropriately in coaching, career pathing, and training, you can actually have a huge impact on job satisfaction, which drives down your absenteeism and turnover and drives up your customer satisfaction. So you do have levers here when it comes to job satisfaction. Surprisingly enough, the compensation lever is the weakest lever. The strongest lever is your training hours, and then career pathing and coaching are sort of in between. But you do have the ability to drive high levels of job satisfaction and hence reduce your turnover and absenteeism, which reduces your cost per ticket, and drive a higher level of customer satisfaction. Hybrid desks, where you have technicians that do both level 1 and desktop support, are becoming more common. However, you should know that a good desktop support tech doesn't always make a good remote tech, and vice versa. A good remote tech, level 1 tech, doesn't always make a good desktop support tech. So be careful about those that you cross-train, or be careful about those if your entire desk is hybrid. Be cautious because there's only about a 30% overlap between high-quality desktop support techs and high-quality service desk techs. There aren't that many people that are good at both of them. But these hybrid desks are becoming more common, particularly in environments where you're co-located. Well, you really have to be co-located with your customers if you're going to be able to do both remote support and jump and run, meaning you get up out of your seat and you go to the side of the user or the device. You've got to be co-located, and generally in smaller environments, fewer than 15 technicians, this kind of model, hybrid model, jump and run model as it's sometimes called, works pretty well. Technicians are being increasingly held accountable, and the scorecard that I introduced to you a little bit earlier is oftentimes repurposed for individual technicians, the idea being that if every technician has a scorecard and they get a score every month, you can give them very objective feedback and coaching on their performance, and you can use these metric scores to give them very pinprick strike guidance on how they can improve their performance. You can identify, for example, here initiative, which is a subjective factor, but you can quantify it by putting it on a scale of 0 to 5, for example. This particular tech's doing very well on that, but they're not doing so well, for example, on the service request close per month. So a higher metric score means better performance. A lower metric score means worse performance. The overall score can be used to compare them to other techs in the organization. We don't put the name of the tech here in the left column because we don't want to embarrass anybody. But the idea is that by providing this objective feedback, the service desk or the desktop support technician knows exactly where they need to focus their attention to improve their performance, and they understand how they're performing relative to their peers within the support organization. Final trend I want to talk about is service and support as a business. Most assume that there's not much upside in service and support because only 4% of IT spending goes towards level 1 support and desktop support. And so oftentimes CIOs, CTOs, and others treat service and support as a necessary evil, as a keep the lights on function, as a cost center. And typically in a cost center, the goal is to minimize cost, minimize headcount. But the most effective support strategies focus on maximizing value.